All right, welcome to the Love, Learn, Play podcast presented by the nonprofit organization Universal Enlightenment and Flourishing. And here we sit down with individuals who've dedicated their lives to helping others flourish to discuss the Love, Learn, Play mindset, which is UEF's simple framework for happiness and flourishing in life. And you can find all of our episodes at uef.org and follow us on social media at UEF Insights. My name's Alan. I'll be representing UEF, and in this episode, I'll be chatting with Dr. Alejandro Chaoul, a longtime practitioner and teacher of Tibetan yoga, and one of those special people who had an unexpectedly great influence on the direction of my life relative to how short our one and only interaction before today was. So it's a great pleasure for me to be able to reconnect with Dr. Shaul and learn a whole bunch more about him and his life and his work and the extent to which love, learning, and play have helped him and those whom he helps flourish.
Thank you, Ellen. It's great. It was great to reconnect when you emailed me and remember that time at one of my favorite places in the world, which is Esalen. And it's always very, very special when, as a teacher, when you're able to touch others and see that it's a positive influence in their lives.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to sort of reminiscing about that. But I want to start with something I didn't plan on asking you ahead of time, and seems strange maybe to start with for this podcast about flourishing and about a spiritual practice. But we got to talk about the World Cup because it's one of those things that for me actually um, is sort of this embodiment of love, learn, and play. Um, I mean, it's something I watch every 4 years, and I have like these snapshot memories of every World Cup I've watched and who I've watched it with and what we were doing and where we were. And every time I watch it, I learn about new countries, not new countries, but I learn new things. And I find myself rooting for like the DR Congo and learning things about that country that I didn't know and Paraguay. And it's just such a fun event and always a wonderful opportunity for getting together with people. And I wanted to ask you about this because I saw the LinkedIn post you made with the picture of you and your son at the Argentina game in Dallas last week. And just for me, like I love the event, but I don't have a horse in the race now that the U.S. is out and Italy didn't even qualify. So I have no national or ethnic allegiances anymore. But that's not true for you. And to top it off, you're based in Houston. There we go. There's the Argentina jersey. So as a dedicated fan of like a very important team in this tournament, and as somebody that's been, in the thick of it, being in Houston, just I was hoping you could share more about what it meant to you to be at that game with your son and to be able to share this event with him and with everyone in your city and with all these fans that have come from across the world.
Yeah, this is, Argentinian. I mean, I'm Argentinian, and we are crazy about soccer or what we call football.
Yeah.
And in fact, we call it's a religion.
Hmm.
And the fans, I mean, it's just amazing. I mean, is so we even a day before the game, you have what we call the banderazo, which is everyone, which means kind of the big flag, or and
Mm.
basically we're all with our shirts and singing and all these songs that and and actually with my son in particular, this is the third World Cup that we actually get to go to games. So we were
Oh, wow.
together in Russia, together in Qatar. And actually, this shirt that I was showing is from Qatar. And then now we were both in Dallas and actually a few days ago in Miami. So, and Argentina seems to have a way of making us suffer. Uh,
I
as
mean,
you
just
know, we
minutes ago.
minutes ago we were watching on this time on TV, Argentina Egypt. We were losing 2-0 to Egypt until the 79th minute, and we ended up winning 3-2. So It's a kind of a heart attack. But so it's good for HRV. So there's some positive qualities there, particularly if you end up winning. But actually, Egypt did a great, an amazing game, and their goalie was fabulous. The same with last week with Cabo Verde, which again, as you said, a lot of times some people don't even know where these countries are. So Cabo Verde and their goalie, there was something interesting that before the World Cup, he had 45,000 followers, and now he has 17 million followers because
Wow.
he has
Yeah,
done.
the world literally fell in love with the guy.
Yeah, and with Cabo Verde. In fact, if I wouldn't have been Argentinian, I would have gone with them. But you know, and again, we won 3-2 in a very tough game.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing your thoughts on that. And there's much more we could say about the World Cup, but I want to talk about you and your work with Tibetan yoga. Tibetan yoga is something you've been practicing and teaching for decades. And from my one experience with the practice that you referenced earlier, I can say it's unlike any other contemplative or spiritual practice I've tried. Certainly very different from, Bikram yoga and things that, are maybe more common or well-known forms of yoga to people in the West. So, hoping you can give us a basic description of what Tibetan yoga is, what it looks like in practice, and what some of its spiritual and philosophical roots are.
Yeah, thank you. And you know, your question is very timely because I just started an organization called Tibetan Yoga Wellbeing. And
Hmm.
one of the things is, what is Tibetan yoga? So some people, when they see Tibetan yoga, they think, so it's a kind of yoga. So as you said, Bikram yoga, Ashtanga yoga, Hatha yoga. And so when they come thinking that it's a yoga, then they're
Hmm.
like, wait, but it's not really one of those yogas. And then when they look at Tibetan, they're like, okay, what does that mean? Okay, it comes from Tibet. So what does it mean? So in a way, that's why I put my slide on today.
Hmm.
So actually, the word Tibetan yoga, it's not used like that in Tibetan. We call it Tsa Lung Trul Khor. And Tsa Lung Trul Khor means, so Tsa here means which, and this is a calligraphy made by my teacher Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche.
Hmm.
Actually, very kindly, he made it for me, and then I used it for the T-shirt. But also, I have it printed in, or I have it uh, in a frame, in two frames actually, because they're two in a way sometimes put together, sometimes they're separate. So there's Tsa Lung and there's Trul Khor. And Tsa Lung, Tsa means channels, Lung means breath, when in many other mind-body practices could be called Chi or
Hmm.
Prana. And Trul Khor literally means magical wheel or magical movements. And so the idea of this kind of practice is that through movements you guide with your mind. So it is a mind body practice, but it's not just mind body, but it's mind subtle body. So Tsa Lung really means kind of really connecting to the subtle body, to those inner channels through which the lung, the breath, can circulate. And so basically, what you do is you train your mind to guide the breath, to connect to these kind of inner architecture, or what sometimes they call the subtle body. And as you breathe into it, you are connecting to your whole body as a mandala. Mandala in Tibetan is Gilkor. Mandala is the Sanskrit word that has become kind of an English word as well, or in other Western languages. And in Tibetan, Gilkor means center and periphery. So in a way, your body has a center and a periphery, and through these movements, you're awakening your mandala, awakening the sacred mandala. Or as my teacher Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche wrote for a book on Tsa Lung, he called it awakening the sacred body. And I think this is really what's happening. You're using the body from inside out to awaken yourself and to this magical aspect of the movements. It's not magic as it's something that comes from nothing, but actually magic in the sense of special experiences, maybe spiritual experiences that arise from these practices. And these movements are all done while you're holding the breath. And so, and there's different kinds of holding the breath. Sometimes we hold it in different chakras or energetic centers. Sometimes we hold it in the whole central channel in a way that it's pervasive. And so as you inhale, sometimes even re-inhale, and kind of as my teacher who passed away, Lopon Tenzin Namdak, who was 100 years old, and I dedicated my last book to him, you know, he would say the reinhalation is like activating that breath, and it's
Mm.
a breath of medicine. So you activate it, becoming that medicine that then you use as you're holding the breath to massage, to move, to it. And as you're doing the movement, kind of the whole body stirs that particular area of the body. And then as you exhale sometimes just through the nose, sometimes with sounds. So you do it with the nose, and then these sounds like ha, peh. Ha means kind of this just exhalation. Pe means this cutting, not just cutting the stale breath, but cutting all your elaborations of the mind. So for a moment, this pe, you're in this moment of almost no thoughts. We call it hedawa. And the idea is that what we're doing is we're familiarizing. You know, this word meditation that we use so often in Tibetan is gom. It's related to another Tibetan word called kom, which means familiarity. So the meditation is familiarizing with two main things: method and wisdom. Method are all these different methods. In the Tibetan tradition, we say there's 84,000 of them. So if you don't like one, there's 83,999 others. But also with that wisdom, with that experience. So as you kind of come back to that experience, there's a sense of aha, kind of recognition of what we call your natural state of mind. So this state of mind, no one is bringing to you. You already were born with it, but you
Mm.
need to familiarize with it so you recognize it. And the whole point is to stay longer and longer and longer. And if you're able to stay 24 hours a day or 24/7, then you're a Buddha, right? That's what Buddha means, enlightened, right? So this enlightenment is being able to be in your natural state of mind all the time. But for us, non-enlightened, we have at least kind of glimpses of it
Mm.
as we are getting more familiar. So each of these Tsa Lung Trul Khor movements are opportunities to reconnect us to that natural state of mind.
Wow. Yeah, it really takes me back hearing you describe this to my one experience that I had with it. But it's also interesting to hear you repeatedly use this phrase natural state of mind. So of course, this is something that is a concept in other religious traditions as well of sometimes the path towards knowledge or wisdom or spiritual progression is more sort of like a return to um, some natural state, right? And it's interesting because that's also at UEF kind of the focus that we place on love, learning, and play is exactly that. That it's these things that we naturally do when we're children. It's sort of the things that we naturally gravitate towards um, that help us flourish, and somewhere along the way, as we pick up various things as adults, we kind of lose that capacity. Um, and so I kind of wanted to talk about maybe just like your overall um, life path and how Tibetan yoga fits into that. It's something that you obviously feel very strongly about and has impacted you greatly. So I'm curious to hear, how would you describe yourself before and after
Hmm.
discovering Tibetan yoga, and what impact do you think it had on bringing you back to this natural state of mind, whether that was like the spiritual thing or bringing you back to this state of flourishing, of loving, learning, playing?
Yeah, I think kind of all of the above, right?
Mm,
So, you know, when I started meditating, I was in high school and I was actually looking for something that would help me through certain kind of, I call them existential attacks,
mm,
that then I linked actually with what I was living in Argentina, which it was a time of bombs and state repression. So we had many that we would call desaparecidos, which are people that disappeared, that, a car would come and pick them up. And, people would say, oh, they must have done something, right? And, maybe in some situations, even now, we have things like that, even in this country, right, where people are just being picked up. Um, and again, people say, well, they probably have done something, but many don't. And so it creates this sense of anxiety, of existential anxiety of, will I be alive? Right?
mm. Yeah.
And what happens when I die, because it's not if I die. Uh, and so for me, I don't remember how, but I got this book Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse, and
Mm,
that was very helpful because it talked about the sufferings of birth, old age, sickness, and death. And I was very interested, and I read it many times during, I guess, starting at 8 years old till 12 or 13. And then I found actually the uncle of a very good friend of mine was a meditator, and so he trained me in TM, Transcendental Meditation. And that was very helpful. It was almost like this sweeping effect of the anxiety, at least for a while. And so I really enjoyed the practice. And then when I came to the US, I came as a transfer student as an undergrad, even though I came to study advertising and communications. I really got into it. Many of these practices that were available around campus in Boston. And so I practiced Zen meditation. I learned to cook vegetarian with Hare Krishna and learned their practices and so many others. And I had a lot of Indian friends. And that led me to actually, when I graduated, to go to India. And when I went into India, I was like really looking for a teacher that would guide me.
mm.
And as I was doing that, I found actually first was His Holiness the Dalai Lama, which actually yesterday was his birthday, 91st birthday.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
And
This is such great timing.
yeah, and a month ago I was with him again, so in Dharamsala. And, um, and that really changed my life. That was a first kind of really big change, and met my first teacher in that place called Dharamsala where the Dalai Lama lives. Um, and then through that came back to Argentina, continued practicing. And then there was a teacher that came to Argentina called Namkhai Norb Rinpoche. And started teaching something that was called Yantra Yoga. And really it was Tsa Lung Trul Khor. He just kind of renamed it to make it easier for us. And, and he taught it also through one of his senior students called Fabio Andrico. And I got really connected to that because it was almost like this embodiment. It was like not just meditating from the neck up, but was really grounding. And and it was this kind of touching back into this natural state of mind. Actually, I remember Norbu Rinpoche would say that this was a whole path to enlightenment. And I thought that was really great, right? And so I continued practicing, and then I got more into this kind of, there's many branches within Tibetan Buddhism. And I met, as I was going to see the Dalai Lama, so kind of, so to say some dates. So 89 was when I went first to India, and I was there for 9 months, 89, 90. So I call it sometimes my second gestation period. And then as I was looking, I met many Indian teachers, Tibetan teachers, and I really got connected to His Holiness and to Yeshe Dorje Rinpoche. And then as I was organizing actually the visit of His Holiness the Dalai Lama to Argentina, we met many people in 91 back in New York at the Madison Square Garden, interesting place to have a teaching. And right before that, this great teacher from the Burn tradition was teaching. His name was Lopon Tenzin Namdak. And Namkai Norbu Rinpoche asked me to meet him. And this is the teacher that then passed away last year, and he was 100 years old.
Mm.
And, and he became really crucial for me. And when I went to Nepal to meet Namkai Norbu Rinpoche for a retreat, I went to Lopon's monastery, and he asked me to stay there. And there was a young monk that was coming from Amdo, from the northeast Tibet, and he was practicing another kind of Tsa Lung Trul Khor, and the abbot of the monastery, Kemponima Wanjal, said, "Do you want to learn it?" And we were like 6 Westerners from different countries, one from Italy, one from Hong Kong, one from Switzerland. Who else was there? Myself. I think maybe we're just 4. No, yeah. So in any case, and we learned in 3 days. This person taught us all these things, and from a text actually that I have, and that then from which I wrote my dissertation many years later, and then my last book. And I got fascinated with it. And I came back to Argentina, continued practicing it, came to the States for a retreat with my teacher Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche that started a training. He said it's going to be a 7-year training, and he was bringing Lopon, who was his teacher. And I told him, I had just learned a few months ago this practice at Trita Norwitz at Lopon's monastery. And it changed my practice. There was something that I noticed in my practice that was very clear. Every time, every movement, every ha-pe, it was such a clearing experience, such a open and clear space and clarity. I mean, it was amazing. And so I told Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche, and he said, I've learned this when I was a monk. Why don't we go over this text? And we went, so we lived a few blocks away back in Charlottesville, Virginia. And so I went every morning at 5 to his home. And we went over what I learned, what he had learned. And then we were coming to the second retreat of those 7 years. And he asked me to start teaching it to a small group. And so that was back 95. And and ever since then, I kept on teaching. And then he asked me to teach in Mexico and in Europe and in different parts of the States. And it really became kind of both my main practice and something that I would teach. And then as I was at Rice University here in Houston, I did my PhD, and my dissertation was on these practices. And because I was in Houston, and the teacher I had mentioned, Namkai Norbu Rinpoche, and also my father were had been diagnosed with different kinds of cancer, and here there's a large cancer center called MD Anderson. I started volunteering there. And then slowly, someone his name is Lorenzo Cohen, at that time a researcher in behavioral science, um, asked me about Tibetan yoga, and I had just been in an article at Yoga Journal, so that was my CV in a way about what is Tibetan yoga. His grandmother was Vanda Scaraveli, a famous yoga teacher and student also of Desikachar and Krishnamacharya, not Krishnamacharya, and Krishnamurti. And so it was really, we kind of hit it off in a way, and he asked me to, um, what about including what we're doing in my dissertation? And so my dissertation, well, was kind of a hybrid, because at that time in religious studies, to bring this kind of research, clinical research, was kind of awkward.
Mhm. Right.
And actually, one of my mentors, of the dissertation said, "I think what you're doing is great, but you're not going to get a job in religious studies." And she was right. I never did. I always went. Then I went to the medical center and continued there. We got a grant to study this, and so it was. So I ended up kind of studying it from the Tibetan tradition, keep on going to India and Nepal, doing research on this, studying with these great teachers, and with the texts, and then translating the text. And that was part of my dissertation, and then started to do research on them with the support of my teachers. And as you said, it became part of my life. So,
Yeah. I can share a little bit about my experience with you and our Houston and Rice connection. Um, as you mentioned, we met at Big Sur, at the Esalen Institute in Big Sur, California. And that was back in 2013, I think. And it's interesting the way that you started off um, telling your story, because I ended up there because of what you might call an existential shock, right? And it was my first year in college, and I actually dropped out at the start of my second semester, and and I ended up at Esalen because whatever, long story, but I needed something to do, right? And it seemed like a good place to go experiencing something different and maybe try to find some clarity, right? And I saw a flyer with your face and your name, and it said Rice University, PhD. And so I knew I had to drop in and sat for, I think it was an hour-long workshop, and got to do some of the Tibetan yoga practices. And like I said, it made a big impression on me. Um, but you made a big impression on me also afterwards. I just remember how I remember your sense of humor and your smile and just how joyful you were. Um, and you kept asking me like, "Oh, is Bill Parsons still there? Is Anne Klein still there?" And you're just naming all these professors, and yeah, you were so enthusiastic about it. When I went back to Rice shortly after that, I signed up for a bunch of classes with those people. And hearing you tell your story and talking about how important the teachers in your life were, that was definitely true for me as well. Um, but Bill Parsons is a great example of this. But a lot of my favorite teachers, they're also fun and funny and playful, and it seems very much to me, just from the limited encounter I had, that that's true for you as well. You bring an element of play into um, the learning environment, and I'm wondering to what extent that shows up even in a hospital setting, like MD Anderson, where the stakes are very high. You're dealing with cancer patients. It could be somber, it could be grim, but there's people need these things to flourish, whether they're people in good health or people in bad health. And yeah, what does this playful attitude and the spirit of learning look like inside a hospital setting like that?
yeah. I think it's crucial. I think, one of the things that attracted me to the Dalai Lama and then to Tibetans in general, they're so playful. Talking about the World Cup, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie The Cup. So the
Mm-hmm.
cup is about a movie on in a monastery of these kids that are monks and want to see the World Cup. So
Oh, wow. Yeah, I got to put that on the list.
I recommend it. And they're very playful, and they show some of the, kind of, how would you say in English, kind of mischievous
Hmm.
things that they do. But I always found the Tibetans very, very playful. Like, for example, in the monastery of my first teacher, Yeshe Dorje Rinpoche, they would ask me things like, in a ritual, carry a cup which was full to the brim with an offering, right? Usually wine. And so when you carry it walking backwards because you are still facing the altar. So you're walking backwards to the door. And so I'm carrying it. And of course, it starts dropping, right? It starts, and so, in kind of coming from Argentina, I would think, oh, this is a sin, right? I'm gonna go straight to hell. And instead, their response, they were cracking up, and there was no thing of, oh, you're doing it bad. I mean, it was like it's part of it. We're all humans. We're trying our best here, and this aspect of playfulness, you see it in His Holiness the Dalai Lama, his laughter, The first time I met him in a public teaching, I remember that the last person who asked a question said, anything that you have to tell me, His Holiness? And he laughed. He said, no, really, no. And then he turned and became, he comes kind of from play to seriousness. Yes, a good heart is the best religion. Just
Hmm.
and which again might sound really, when it's said in that way, it's such a strong teaching, right? And then again, okay, bye. So I remember when I came to Argentina, one of the first Tibetan teachers I met there was Tsogni Rinpoche, and he was my age, which at that time we were in our 20s. And we would play football together, meaning soccer, of course, and uh, and then with his assistant Tashi, and then when he would sit on the throne, this straight teaching, right? And so this capacity of going from really seriousness to play is really important, and something that in the Tibetan tradition in general, but particularly some of my teachers like Namkhai Norbu Rinpoche and Lopon Tenzin Namdak and Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche would say, is this integration of practice into your daily life, right? That it's not, so many times we think of practice the time that we're meditating or
Hmm.
doing our yoga or our Tibetan yoga or Tai Chi, whatever we're doing. All are great, by the way. But even if we practice, I don't know, an hour a day, 2 hours a day, we still have 22 hours left, right? So what are we doing? So how do we integrate? Is there any translation there? Is there any something that you connect to that you bring into it? And that's really what's really important. So if we think of love, learn, and play, right?
Hmm.
So this love of this connection of open-heartedness, right? Um, a good heart is the best religion. And this learn of always open to be learning. You're always a student of life. You're not just, even if you're a teacher, even if you're, His Holiness the Dalai Lama starts a teaching and he does 3 prostrations, right? I mean, there's always openness to learn. And then this playfulness. And so, responding directly to your question about the hospital,
Hmm.
even there, kind of humor plays a big, big part. And not just humor, but just playing. So if you go from, when I was teaching there, some of these things, Really weird. Weird in the sense of, new, right? So
Hmm.
holding and then shaking and ha pe, many times they do that and they start laughing, and that is totally fine, right? So and then but then slowly you can also be both serious and playful, right? And it's in the same spectrum, if you would, right? And and I think one supports the other. It's not that they're just two ends of the spectrum. You go from seriousness to playfulness, and it's part of even your serious being playful. And playfulness has a very big part on how you take your life. So, for example, again, in the hospital, we in the Buddhist tradition, there's this a lot of teaching on impermanence, right? And a lot of people think of it as, oh, that's so negative. It's not negative. It's realistic, right? I mean, even Jesus and Buddha and Muhammad, and they all died, right? I mean, even if they resurrected and at certain, they're enlightened, but in terms of this, as my teacher would say, this Airbnb, you have to leave it. Yeah?
I like that.
And so it's a rented, right? And so at some point you have to leave it and you move on. Now, some people believe this move on, reincarnation, some don't. But, even if you don't, if you're able to understand that we all are in this journey, we using this, there's a sense of playfulness. And part of the play is, how do you use this body, this breath, this mind, which sometimes we call the three doors, to come into that natural state of mind. So whether you call it, I think that even this word core, movement, right? You could say there's playfulness, right? This magical movement, this Trul Khor. There is a sense of playfulness in it. And but I think it also brings it to playfulness in life. I think it's really important to flourishing. I love co-teaching. I love co-teaching because I always learn from other people. In Esalen, I co-teach quite a bit. I'm teaching again in February with Eve Eggman, and we love co-teach. But I co-teach with many people. And for example, I remember with Ross Ellenhorn, who does a lot of work in the area. He's a PhD in social work, but he does with psychology, with really, and kind of not getting people into this is your diagnosis and you get stuck.
Mm.
Playfulness becomes very important. So we did on meditation and playfulness, right? When I teach here at the Jung Center, for example. So I think it's really important as a way of not take it so seriously, which doesn't mean don't be serious about it. It doesn't mean to joke. It means to really take it almost, I don't know if you have this in English, with a, we say in Spanish, con una pizca de sal. It's like with a drop of salt,
Oh yeah,
or
same
maybe,
same thing in English.
okay, or maybe sugar, because, whatever it's like, put a little spice and be playful, enjoy it. And when you think of the mandala, again, coming back to that metaphor, it is part of the play. It is part, we actually used a word, rolpa, in Tibetan, which it's this playing, it's kind of the playfulness of samsara, of being in this life that, again, we come, grow, flourish, dissolve, and continue. And so, particularly with patients, I think it's really important. And one of the things that I learned with patients is that the majority actually want to talk about what's going on.
Mm.
If you just dance around it, they feel even more uncomfortable. Why aren't you saying it? Why aren't you
Yeah.
saying that, yes, I am close to death? What do I do? What,
Mm.
what can be helpful? Now, not everyone, and some people prefer not to, but in my experience, at least at some point, that's where they get to. And they do want to talk about it. And they don't like when we step around it. So,
Hmm.
and one of the ways it is playfulness as well. Being able to, be playful about it, because actually it's not just for cancer patients that they may die. We will die too. So
Hmm.
we're the same, and that part of human to human, I think it's crucial. That's why in the department or in the area that I was in integrative medicine, it's about a human to human kind of, in the medical school, we call it medical humanities, right? This
Hmm.
aspect of, yeah, human to human. And I think that's really very, very important.
Yeah, so on the subject of impermanence and taking things maybe a bit too seriously, um, at UEF we talk about flourishing, we talk about obstacles to flourishing as well. Like,
Do you want to say what UEF is? Does
oh yeah, I'm
everyone know?
sorry, UEF, it's the acronym for Universal Enlightenment and Flourishing. So it's the nonprofit organization on behalf of which we're doing this podcast. It's been around for about 10 years, and yeah, it's just dedicated to
No, I
um,
knew it. I just wanted to see if the audience knew it.
understood. Okay. Universal Enlightenment and Flourishing, UEF.
Great.
Very simple URL too, uef.org.
Excellent.
Thank you. Um, So, UEF, one of the things we talk about is obstacles to flourishing, with one of them being what we would call means ends inversion, which I think does circle around those themes of impermanence and taking things seriously. Like, when we take impermanent things too seriously, like money, where we think this is like the ultimate pursuit, this is the thing that we need to center our life around, and it's really dangerous to do so for many reasons. But thinking about certain things that should be means versus ends, right? But there are other obstacles to flourishing as well, and other obstacles to, um, as you described it, like the original clear state of mind. So I'm wondering, what kinds of obstacles do you see people having to kind of tapping into that clear state of mind, whether it's mental, physical, spiritual? And do you have any advice for people on how to try to clear away some of those cobwebs, whether that's with a practice like Tibetan yoga or even just with a mindset shift or advice for kind of recognizing um, when something like means ends inversion might be arising in your life.
Yeah. So let me first go kind of more traditional, so in the Tibetan tradition, we say that the three main obstacles, sometimes we even call them poisons, are attachment, aversion, and ignorance.
Mm,
So attachment could be attachment, lust, control. I want to do it. It has to be like I want it, and that will bring me happiness. Or kind of aversion. No, that's horrible. What you're saying, it's bad. And so kind of, or I don't want to even go there. So that's sometimes even gets into irritation, anger, hatred, kind of all those. So the yes and the no. And then the third one is more this confusion. I'm not sure, which
mm,
actually it's a good way because at least you're not sure. And then it may bring you into this learning, right?
hmm.
Openness to learning. But these three that are also part of how we clear internally our channels, our Tsa, these are the three main obstacles also that go all the way in Tibetan medicine. So all the illnesses arise from that ignorance, that it's kind of before even confusion, anger, and and attachment, which is the ignorance of not realizing that you have the full capacity to become enlightened. Right?
Mm.
This natural state of mind, you have it. Whether you are a human of any race, whether you are an animal, whether you are any sentient being. And so that's really important to know that. And because of that, you have that capacity to flourish, right? And so if you look at two of my things in the back, the
Mm.
one of this kind of open wings, this is from a very good friend of mine, Dorothy Patterson. She has a burnt endowment that started by her sister who passed away, and it's about the blue macaws. But it's this, I find it also, it's like extending your wings and flying. And
Mm.
and the other one is actually kind of, you don't see it because it's a, but there's like a Buddha and all beings around, right? So it's like a mandala of Buddhas,
Mm.
meaning that we're all enlightened. We're all Buddhas. As one time I was translating for Lopon Tenzin Namdak, and there were 500 people in Mexico, and he said, "You're all enlightened. You just haven't realized it," right? So it's this, the practice, the learning is the realization, and to both love yourself and love others, right? And as we as we do this, I think it's really very important to allow ourselves to open our wings. So what I found in my life is that so many times, even with very well-meaning parents, friends, professors, and so forth, bosses, they don't let you fully open your wings,
Mm.
right? And so there's this metaphor in the Dzogchen, which is a tradition in Buddhism and Bon, which is called the great completeness, a great perfection, that says that we are born like Garudas. Garudas are this mythical bird that as it hatches from the egg, it knows how to fly. It just needs to perfect it. So
Mm.
we have that capacity. So we just need to perfect it. But a lot of times, all the way from our parents to friends to bosses to, they they want to keep us kind of in little cages because it's safer. But the opportunity to open your wings or fly, I think it's crucial. And I felt many times that I had to do it, and it's more risky, yes, but it's also that playful. It's both the love, the learn, and the play, because there's the love for life, for flourishing, the learning as you know which way you're going. It's not the path that has been shown to you necessarily, and be playful in that. Um, actually, I would have to say, even in my professional life, I didn't follow the traditional way, even at Rice. I mean, when I
Yeah.
graduated, I didn't follow the academic track. And I mean, I love those who do, and I actually love that track,
Hmm.
but I didn't fit. And
Yeah.
so, I had to find my way. And in some of the jobs, I had to even let go what they call the golden shackles, right? That they give you all these benefits, but at the end, you know, they're golden, but they're still shackles. So, fly, dream, love what you do, keep on learning, be playful, you know, and follow your heart, as I guess most of our grandmothers would tell us.
Yeah.
Maybe
That's great.
grandparents, grandfathers too, but
Hmm. I love that. It's great advice, and you explain it so beautifully. Um, so just one last thing. I like to end these by giving our guests an opportunity to sort of talk about something that they're excited about that they've been working on or just whatever else you want to share. I'll share real quickly. I have a copy of this book that you wrote. It's called Tibetan Yoga: Magical Movements of Body, Breath, and Mind, um, which was again just another one of these moments that really like brought me back to that day at Esalen with you. And I would recommend it for anybody that's interested in learning more about Tibetan yoga, the history, the ideas behind it, and even there's some practical stuff in here about how to do the actual practices. So great book. But you mentioned you've written a couple, and just anything else you want to share about some of your other works, and oh, and also how people can kind of follow you and stay up to date to see if you might be teaching a class near them.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that opportunity. So, yeah, actually, that's, I don't know if my favorite books, I like all of them, but that was my last one so far, I should say. I don't want to close the door. But you know, one of the good things there is that, so it's part of my dissertation. I was able, thanks to both the editor Daniel Aitken from Wisdom Publications and Kestrel Montag, who was the marketing. You know, we were able to keep the Tibetan text, my translation, the whole aspect of what I thought coming from my dissertation, and you know, a decade later processing it, and the photos of my teachers and so
Mm.
forth, but also the graphics in the cover and the back cover.
A great cover.
You know, kind of bringing all that part of advertising, and so I love it, right? And on the other hand, really, it's a book that even though I talk about the movements, it's not about learning from the book. It's hopefully inspiring people to say, I want to learn about this. How do
Yeah.
I do it? So
Mhm.
I have a website. At this point is alechaoul.com. Soon I'll have another one, but for now that's the best. I'm in social media, in Instagram, still Facebook, even though my kids joke with me that, you know, it's obsolete. Uh,
I'm on it too. It's fun.
Good. And then LinkedIn. And you can find me again, Ale Chaoul or Dr. Ale Chaoul. I do a lot of things, both online and in person. Um, I love in person when it's possible. Like this Saturday, I'll be here in Houston at Asia Society, open to everyone. I'll be at Omega Institute in upstate New York in September. I'll be at Menla, also in upstate New York in November. Next February, I'll be back in the West Coast in Esalen. I teach in Europe, so if anyone that sees this, at the end of October, I'll be in Toulouse in France. I'm also taking a group to Nepal. So all of that should be in my website. You can register for my newsletter, and I also have my native language, of course, is Spanish. So I do meditaciones en español, and they're free. So I do a lot of free things as well, and people can register. So really, for me, this is, as we say, my dharma. You know, my both in a way of bringing those teachings back, as one of my friends, Wojtek, that works with me, says, the democratization of these
Mhm.
teachings, right? And so I think it's really, really important. And you know, as I met you that time, and so nice to stay in touch. I love that part of being a teacher, of mentoring in some way, of being connected, of sharing. And for me, it is, as you and as Akhil Gupta says in his book that you have behind you, love, learn, and play. So, and yeah, my other books are the other one is also the one before the one you showed is also on Tibetan yoga. And it's called Tibetan Yoga for Health and Well-Being. I share a lot of my research at MD Anderson. And then the
Mm.
first one was in a total different practice of Chur, that is a practice where you visualize, you actually use the body in a very different way. You cut it and offer it. And then you kind of cut, what you're doing is you're cutting the attachment that you have to your body. So yeah, I love to teach, to share, to learn, and to play. So thank you for this opportunity.
Yeah, thank you. It was a pleasure, and hope we can find some time to reconnect again soon.
It'd be great. Yeah, looking forward to connecting in person.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Dr. Chaoul.
Thank you, Alan. And you can call me Ale, by the way. You don't
All
have to
right.
call me
Thank you,
Dr.
Ale.
Joe. Okay. Thank you.